Welcome back to That's So Second Millennium and our new series on papal names, where we will explore the history of popes and the names they have chosen for themselves, or not, because that wasn't always the custom, in the framework of the Pope Name Bracket, a fanciful ranking of 64 possible names a pope could take in the 21st century. Paul and Bill are back and will cover current events, ancient history, philosophy, theology, and many points between. Welcome back, and we're glad you're joining us. All right, well, welcome back, Bill. It's good to be talking with you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you and be speaking with you, Paul.
Yeah, it was just missed connections last time, and I felt like it was long since time to get another episode out there, but it's glad to be working in tandem again, so...
Yeah,
so we come to the next name in the bracket today, and that is Gregory. So I suspect most of the audience has heard of, Gregory the Great. May have some other connotations for the name Gregory from sacred history. So it's a name that seems to have originated in the East, since there are quite a few Saint Gregories going all the way back to, I think there's a Gregory the Thaumaturge Gregory the Illuminator. Gregory the Illuminator, I'm sorry, Gregory the There's other people called the Thaumaturge. But he's apparently a patron of Armenia and died in the early 4th century. So, not long after Constantine and the Roman Empire. But of course, that's Armenia. And Armenia is famous for becoming officially Christian a little bit before the Roman Empire actually did.
indeed.
So, and of course, there's Gregory of Nyssa, there's Gregory Nazianzen, there are other Gregories.
Yeah. Right.
So many famous Gregories. So that was already a name. In the 4th century, there was a famous Christian name.
Okay.
So, last time we talked about Pope Leo. So the point of departure was Leo the First, Leo the Great in the 5th century.
Okay.
Right. And
Yeah.
so at that point, the Christianity has been legal for over a century. Now the problem is dealing with emperors, especially heretical emperors, peddling this and that. Arianism, most notably.
Right.
So we've been struggling with that for a while. But then the Western Empire finally just crumbles into oblivion, right? There's no one else to point to even call a Roman emperor in the West. So that whole Diocletian experiment of splitting the empire into two halves finally, basically dies for good at that point. And so the Goths move in. So the German tribes move in all over the place, right? So we have the Ostrogoths, we have the Visigoths in Spain, Ostrogoths are in Italy, the Franks are in France. Actually, they follow the Goths. So in many ways, the Gauls were happy to see the Franks because they could use the Franks against the Goths and other people.
Oh my goodness.
That's the sort of games you end up playing in the decaying Roman Empire. And then, of course, there were the Vandals, and the Vandals were fairly bad news. Sacked Rome, kind of wrecked North Africa. But, and really, north of the Mediterranean and what would become France, Spain, and Italy, it was not that violent a transition. It was sort of, like we're just working for new masters now. Okay,
Right.
I guess we'll deal with that. And it was really not until the 6th century. So, there's a succession of Eastern emperors, and then we get to Justinian, who's famous for his law code, and
Yes.
also famous for trying to reconquer the entire Mediterranean, which was a very violent, bloody affair, and probably caused more damage in many historians' estimation than the original, transition to Germanic rulers. So that's happening in the 6th century, in the 500s. And
Okay.
that's, of course, when Gregory the First is born and is a boy in that era when this is going on. So the Goths conquer Rome. Belisarius, Justinian's general, conquers Rome. Belisarius leaves. The Goths move back in. Narses, another general, comes in and conquers Rome again. This is kind of destructive. This is a fairly destructive process.
Yeah.
So Rome is really, Dark Ages Rome is a pretty sorry, blighted affair in many ways. It has fallen immeasurably from where it was under Augustine, Augustus,
Justice.
where it
Yes.
was under, yeah, not Augustinian, um,
Uh,
what it was under, Trajan, under Marcus Aurelius, it's just nothing like what it was. It's already, people poking around, in the shadows of ruined greatness.
he was, yeah.
It would be a fascinating and sort of, really dismal place to go back in a time machine and visit,
Mm,
Rome in the year 550 or something like that.
mm.
So that's Gregory's background. Gregory's raised by very pious parents. Actually, his mother and two of his aunts are saints as well. So, he was brought up right, just like Timothy. Paul talking about, Timothy's mother and grandmother being such great people. Um, you know, Gregory the Great comes from similar background,
Oh,
and he's a very sharp fellow. He becomes a monk, and the popes look at him and say, "We need this guy." He's actually sent on a mission to Constantinople to transact business,
mm,
and he actually winds up staying there for 6 years. So he develops some relationships and some, as it were, international experience, and comes back to Rome. And from then on, actually, he's so popular in Rome that the people won't let him be. He wants to go famously to England, what would become England. He wants to go to Britain,
uh,
and evangelize. I guess at that point the English have started to cross over. That's right. It's the 500s. So in the very, very early stages, right? So you've got the Angles, the Jutes, the Saxons, famously crossing the Channel, crossing the edge of the North Sea to get to what they're going to make into England, and take it away from the Britons, from the Celts, and most of that part of the country.
right.
So, so these, whether they're visitors or there's a famous, retelling of the story where there are actually slave boys being sold in Rome. And these, cute blonde slave boys apparently arouse, Gregory's compassion that they should be preached the gospel. And he wants to go out there, but he's prevented. They're like,
Oh,
no, no, by no means are you going to be allowed to send this guy away from Rome. So,
mm,
so he stays in Rome. There's a flood. There's then a pestilence because the flood has knocked out, the grain supply. It's destroyed, granaries along the Tiber. So it's an awful, awful period. And then the Pope dies, and Gregory's elected. And
okay.
Gregory is horrified. One almost wants to say disgusted by this. He does
Mm,
not want to be Pope.
uh,
Supposedly, he writes a letter to the emperor, with several cogent arguments why the emperor should not confirm his election, because in this era, that continued to be customary.
that was
The
de rigueur. Yeah.
yeah, there's the emperor in Constantinople, and he still must be consulted. But apparently, the prefect of the city or someone like that intercepts the letter, and just sends the record of the election, who voted for what, or whatever sort of narrative they put around it. The previous pope died on this day. His funeral was celebrated. The clergy gathered in good order, and everyone pointed at that guy, and said that he must be pope. So, and again, this is the first millennium, so he's already named Gregory. There was no question of what his regnal name would be.
I see.
So
Yeah.
so he's confirmed in due course, but in the meantime, he's running the city because he is a good administrator. That's why he was employed by popes for missions like that. And
All
so
right.
he organizes a procession very famously.
Yeah.
And there is a place in Rome called Sant'Angelo where supposedly, this procession to pray for an end to the famine, pestilence. There's a pestilence as well. Yeah. So all sorts of bad things going on. And supposedly St. Michael is seen over this spot in Rome, sheathing his sword, symbolizing that the pestilence is over. And
Oh,
from then on, this point is called Sant'Angelo. So I think it was something built by Hadrian, probably originally.
huh.
So, okay, so the news comes back, and Gregory is confirmed as Pope. There's no wriggling out of it now. He continues to complain about it for the rest of his life in his letters, of which we have reams. So that's a good sign. It's always better not to want to be Pope rather than to want to be Pope.
Yes.
Um, but so he continues as a I mean, he's a good administrator, and in fact, he's an excellent administrator. And by this point, the practice is already very well established of giving land to the church and asking for prayers in return. How
Hmm.
develop the practice of, saying n masses per day or having a chantry or so on, as was the case in the late Middle Ages. There was still a process of development in front of that. But there's a lot of land. The church owns land in various places in Italy. It owns a lot of land in Sicily and Sardinia. So the
Hmm.
Pope is a huge landowner, effectively. And Gregory is going to, by God, make sure that these are run well, which was not always done in the
Hmm.
past. And he ends up consolidating them into, a very effective, basically economic engine. And then he, with his experience in Constantinople, which in that era was, pretty hapless, um, he just looks at the situation with, good intentioned realpolitik and says, if anything good is going to happen in Italy, I'm going to have to do it myself, with God's
Hmm.
help, but I'm going to have to do it myself. So he negotiates with Lombards. He, deals with all sorts of, political wrangling in Italy at the era. And, has to do it with, whatever modicum of troops he actually has under his own command. But he's got to find willing allies and he's got to negotiate and he does it very well. So,
Okay.
but he's a doctor of the church, right? His name is associated with Gregorian Chant, which
Oh
certainly
my, that's
existed in
the
some form
Gregory.
before
Okay.
him. But
Hmm.
yeah, it existed in some form before him, but his name is at least attached to it because he was, one of the great, certainly monastic reformers of the era as well. Um,
Well, it sounds like in all those ways, the church needed a lot of organizational as well as managerial skill, and he was the guy
that's
just
right.
to orchestrate, so to speak, everything, including Gregorian chant.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and of course, he's famous for writing something called the Magna Moralia, so a great, sort of moral theology treatise of the era. So he's a good theologian. He's a legalist. He understands law and what canon law was in that era. So yeah, so he's a seminal figure in the papacy who's not the same after that, right?
Interesting.
This assumption of, implicit responsibility in Italy, obviously that would follow the papacy for over a millennium.
Hmm.
So then that, it was not, Gregory did not absolutely start the process, but he certainly, moved it along and it was what to do at the time. And then there was, further developments you know, in not Constantine, Charlemagne's era, in the late seventh and early ninth, or sorry, late eighth, early ninth centuries. Um, by which point, the Pope really does own land. He really is the prince of a certain swath of Italy, and that continues, all the way to 1870, right? So that's
Hmm.
very long-lived legacy,
Really?
and Gregory the
Yeah.
Great is a key figure in that development.
Would you say that that whole structural ability that he had was a factor in whatever orderliness and geographical and perhaps otherwise a stability that might have existed in the Europe of that time? Obviously, a flawed stability, but the
Right.
church was playing a pretty key role in keeping certain basics sustainable and stable. Is that
Yeah, I mean that was, it was a gift that he had, and it was something that he had certainly practiced and developed to a great extent.
and that
So,
other popes could follow on with some degree for the next several decades?
I mean, he
Or
certainly set an example that popes could look back to,
yeah,
in the immediately following era, but all the way down to the present. Right?
very
He
good.
even writes a fairly um, lengthy, well, I mean, not lengthy necessarily, but a fairly influential um, piece of writing about how a bishop should comport himself. And of
Oh
course,
my.
that's, obviously he is um, trying to trying to live that out himself. So he has very definite ideas as to what uh, what he's supposed to do. So yeah, at the very outset of his pontificate, This, at this point, I'm quoting from the Catholic Encyclopedia.
Uh-huh.
He published his Liber Pastoralis Curae, or book on the office or duties, or cares really of a bishop.
The cares of a bishop.
Yeah, in which he lays down clearly the lines he considers it his duty to follow. His duty, obviously his own. Um, he regards the bishop preeminently as the physician of souls and is divided into four parts.
Mm.
He points out that one, in the first, that only one skilled already as a physician of the soul is fitted to undertake the supreme rule of the episcopate. In the second, he describes how the bishop's life should be ordered from a spiritual point of view, how he ought to teach and admonish those under him. And the fourth, how, in spite of his good works, he ought to bear in mind his own weakness. So, yeah, that sounds like an intriguing book for anyone to read.
Really?
You know, if you need to be skilled already as a physician of the soul, then what is that office like? How does one do that? What does he mean by
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So, and is that limited to pre? I mean, because in this era, who was elected pope? It was a deacon. You tended to
Huh.
jump straight from straight from the diaconate to becoming Bishop of Rome.
Gee. Uh-huh.
You didn't necessarily need to spend any time as a priest, or were even necessarily expected to spend time as a priest. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Ah. Go
but
for the best person,
yeah,
whether or not he wants the job.
yeah, 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 that's right. That's right. That's right. So yeah, so Gregory did have definite ideas. I mean, the whole business about how he politically evolved the papacy, that to a large extent probably he was doing what was expedient at the time and didn't necessarily have a philosophy of, I mean, it was not as if he foresaw, let alone desired, Julian II marching across Renaissance Italy and, adding to the patrimony of St. Peter by, blood and sword. That was probably not his intention. But yeah, he also he did what he saw was necessary. He organized the church certainly economically. He put its house in order from that perspective.
Hmm.
And money is power. So,
All right. Right. Yeah.
but
Very interesting mix of talents and abilities and traits.
yeah. Yeah. So that brings us into, and that's, one of the interesting things about, following through a line of inquiry like we're doing is, what if you really take, some step to even just touch on the lives of, you know, popes throughout history, you spend time in this, mysterious dark ages when
Hmm.
again, we've all, we have no recollection as a culture what was at stake, what people were arguing about, what was at stake, what was going on, that whole period. And of course, it was in that period that Europe, as we knew it in the 20th century, came to exist, right?
Hmm.
It's entirely during that period. I mean, if we
Hmm.
extend it, maybe stretch it back to the year 400, right?
Hmm.
Um, that those 600 years between 400 and 1,000 that no one thinks about. I mean, really 400 to 1,200, let us say, you know, who,
Hmm.
who really picks up anything until, the era of Aquinas. And even
Hmm.
then, fitfully, if you're, maybe if you're a really huge English history buff, you knew, a little bit about the Anglo-Saxon, a tiny bit, probably enough to fit in a thimble about the Anglo-Saxon kings, and mostly about Alfred and Edward the Confessor, right?
Right.
Everybody else could probably go fly a kite, but and then there's the Normans, but by that's already 1066, right? So that's very
Ah,
late in this
right.
period.
Right.
Um, and that's, and the Normans are, basically just executing a coup rather than, completely reshaping England. England had already been shaped, right?
Right.
So England, Wales, Scotland already had their identities. And there was a lot of
Hmm.
history, and of course, a lot has happened, but it was still history happening to these already existing entities. And the same with France, and the same with Spain.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, Italy and Germany forged identities as split up, messes that were
Hmm.
loosely. Italy was just, it was a language as much as anything. It was the fact that somehow south of the Alps, everybody in this peninsula more or less can understand each other, gives them a common culture. But they were like the Greeks of classical antiquity, a great cultural engine going on despite and apparently even to some degree because of, the incredible political disunity and competition. Competition. Yeah,
Right.
hate to go all, Adam Smith, laissez-faire on you, but apparently it exists in this
Oh,
world for a reason.
right. That's right.
So,
Yeah.
but that all of that, emerges from the shadows of the very poorly documented, Dark Ages. And actually,
Yeah.
there's really interesting stuff going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. They were well, people generally don't understand the Dark Ages, even the timeline of them, but it's interesting, and ultimately we see today what emerged from
Yeah,
them. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean the modern period responding to the medieval period, and then, now we have a postmodern period responding to the modern period when,
Yeah.
when,
Yeah.
Europeans fanned out all over the globe and their technology took off so rapidly, that they they carried all before them and made, how much of the world of their colony. I mean, at the height in the 19th century, I mean, good heavens, right? So Britain with its minuscule population. I mean, Great Britain is always, always, always afraid of getting into a war with a continental power.
Ah.
Certainly, France or a united Germany. God forbid that was the final nightmare, as it were.
Hmm.
But Spain could command a massively larger population than England once it was unified. Once
Mm.
France was unified and actually, had any kind of competent leadership, it could, destroy England in the open field if they ever met, which, the English never did, right? There
Mm.
was the Hundred Years' War when England harassed, France, up one side of the country and down the other, but that was because it was a disunited, poorly led, incompetent France, right? And that ceased to exist after the Hundred Years' War.
Mm.
Um, Yeah, so that, Louis the 11th and onward, had too much on the ball, to use a baseball metaphor, to allow
Uh-huh.
that kind of stuff to happen again.
Right.
So England must have a navy and must have the best navy, and it uses that and its technological advantage to conquer the entire subcontinent of India and the millions and millions and millions and millions of people that live there.
Mm. Yes.
An entire old world culture, with, the phenomenally developed, philosophical and spiritual systems,
Right.
but not the technology,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
steel, not gunpowder, or at least not good enough.
Hmm.
Let alone what, of course, happened in the Americas, where, the people in the New World simply just, there weren't enough people to generate the ideas, to generate the technology that could ever keep up with, anybody in the Old World. I mean, obviously, if China had taken it in their mind in the 1400s, they could have sailed across to North America and conquered it very easily. That just wasn't
Yeah.
their plan.
Right.
Um, but yeah, once the Europeans got going, and then of course now we're living in the postmodern era, which is among other things the era of Europeans feeling very bad about themselves for having done all of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
apparently almost literally losing their will to live. It's rather dramatic.
It really
So,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And why do they have that aside from the ghost of their Christian conscience? How did we get there, Bill? We always
I
do stuff
know.
like this. Yeah.
Right. It's
Yeah.
and it's fascinating that it has that sense of what lack it's a lack of cultural self-confidence
Yeah.
that has I guess moved them toward globalism and away from any sense of vigorous national pride or identity, and sadly, that includes any lack of identity with Catholicism or
Yeah.
with religious
Christianity.
structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, I mean, it was, looking at the 19th century and feeling very remorseful about, as a Catholic, about, well, okay, so the Protestant Reformation swept away England and, northeast Germany and the Nordic countries and Holland and so on.
Hmm.
But now the countries that were Catholic are now all, riddled with atheism and anti-clericalism and, just radical thought of all kinds.
Hmm.
Um, it looked like that was even worse. And of course, now that the decay has proceeded further, it's like it's back to six of one, half a dozen of the other, right? Whether you're in Sweden and you're an atheist in Sweden, or you're in France and an atheist in France, and nobody's going to church, no matter what
Yeah.
the church is.
Everybody's afraid to take religion seriously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So and has attributed to it the the idea that that was the reason why Europeans did all these awful things in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, when it's Christianity that's really the reason why they feel so remorseful about it all. They
Oh
just don't
my.
let themselves realize they're Christians anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
A misplaced lack of confidence. My goodness.
yeah, right. So that, we won't, there's no way to do a complete rundown of, Gregory the Great and a podcast like this where we're trying to take a broad survey of the name. But yeah, so the next Gregory, there's also Pope Saint Gregory II, just like Leo, the first several of them are saints.
Hmm.
Um, so this Gregory is Pope from 715 to 731, and he is one of the popes that are in that it's the 700s. There at this era, Rome is in a strange position. So as Gregory the First in particular was instrumental in, Rome was looking out for itself, and yet Rome was the Pope, the Bishop of Rome still had his election confirmed by the emperor, and the only emperor was in Constantinople.
Hmm.
So, so in that era, there was a number of popes who actually had Eastern backgrounds, and this Gregory was one of those.
Okay.
So what's happened at this point? Well, okay, so Gregory the Great dies in 604, and then what happens 30 years after that?
I
Lots of
give up.
things. But in the world at large, there's Muhammad, right?
Oh my, yes.
Yeah. So Gregory the Great was an older contemporary of Muhammad. That's interesting
Interesting.
to think about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that has happened. So, the Eastern Empire, which was already kind of ramshackle, and Gregory the Great was not relying on it for answers in Italy, then, suffers this just, tackled from the blind side by this incredible force that is, early Islam,
Right.
right? So it knocks over the Persian Empire completely, and it
Hmm.
shears off a huge chunk of the Eastern Empire, right? It takes Palestine, it takes, you know, Syria, it takes Egypt, which was an immensely important part of the empire.
Hmm.
And it sweeps right across North Africa and
Right.
starts working its way up through Spain. And of course,
Yes.
in the early 8th century, Charlemagne's dad, Charles Martel, is going to have to face them in Gaul, which is
Hmm.
fortunately their high water mark in that direction.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
yeah, so it's a huge deal. Um, and then at the same time, the Eastern Empire, it still manages to survive somehow. So it's a shrunken rump form of itself, consisting of Anatolia and some stuff in Southeast Europe, but it still exists. It is still a major uh, state, but it's not what it was and will never be again.
Hmm.
So
Mm.
So, the Catholic Encyclopedia entry on Gregory II, makes the comment, uh, the Mediterranean was quickly becoming a Saracen lake.
Oh,
Yes, right. So there's they quickly take to boats
God.
and take up the age-old practice of more or less piracy.
Mm.
Um, so so from then on for centuries, that's a huge, and I mentioned that talking, there were some of the Pope Leos of the following century have to deal with that, and it,
Hmm.
it continues to be a problem right up until, gosh, the 11th century, maybe the year 1100, somewhere around there is probably the last time that was really. I mean, they took over Sicily. They conquered Sicily for a long time.
Mm.
I think the Normans had to take it back from the Saracens. So
Mm.
the Normans were arguably worse than the Saracens, but that's another story. But so anyway, so this Gregory, so he's Pope again from 715 to 731. He's obviously, he's obviously got to follow in Gregory the Great's footsteps in terms of he's got to organize some kind of resistance to all of this because Rome is right at the mouth of the Tiber, right? So if you've
Right.
got people, cruising the Mediterranean looking for prey, Rome is not what it once was, but it's still Rome. So that was a constant concern already at this point.
Mm.
So and of course this is also the latter part of the period of the great heresies. So Gregory II is dealing with the aftermath of all of the. I mean, I think it's largely settled by that point. But he's dealing with the Patriarch of Constantinople. Uh, has to really kind of write an apology to the Pope for leaning too much toward what's called monothelitism, the sort of soft monophysitism that Christ had, just really he just had the divine will. He didn't really have a human will that could contradict his divine will.
Mm.
Well, I mean, of course, even that's technically orthodox. Yeah, yes, he has a human will, but no, it could never have contradicted his divine will. That's at least the way a lot of people read what the orthodox teaching is. But of course, monothelitism is, well, what's the superfluous human will if it can't disagree with the divine will in any, or even conceptually.
Right.
So
Right.
I mean, it's still a pretty thick theological issue. But it
Yeah.
was the subject of a council, and it was disposed of in a fairly definitive way. So, and that was probably the Sixth Ecumenical Council. And that, of course, brings us now into the time of the final, um, the final great heresy of the first millennium, the final great heresy dealt with by an ecumenical council that both the East and the West recognize, which is iconoclasm.
Ah, right.
And I forget who, some thinker of the last few centuries, it could be almost anybody, but commenting on the whole, span of these controversies, wrote something along the lines of, iconoclasm was a pretty lame heresy. There was so much less at stake in iconoclasm than there was in the previous heresy, in Arianism and monophysitism and Nestorianism and monothelitism. All of those had a lot more heft to them, whereas iconoclasm is really, and of course, iconoclasm also springs out of, this is less than a century since Muhammad, um, and people, success sells.
Right.
And what's a key Islamic tenet? Well, iconoclasm,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
No images whatsoever. Any image is a graven image, apparently.
Right.
Let alone, any discussion of whether, well, okay, a graven image, but really what we understand to be meant here is an idolatrous image.
Right.
Something that's, channeling worship towards something that doesn't deserve it,
Right.
possibly
A
something that
different
doesn't even
God. Yeah.
exist. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All that sort of nicety, I mean, people just like simplicity.
Interesting.
So
Yes.
often. Um, so often simplicity will win the day, over and above rational nuance. Um, Not always, but sometimes. And again, if you looked at the world in the year 715 and you looked at who seemed to be winning and who, if you're going to make that your measure, who clearly has God's, favor, it looks like these Muslims are really, the ones who are succeeding. So
Yeah,
maybe it really is time for yet another prophet. And maybe we made a little too much out of this Jesus guy, and we need to put Muhammad up there on the shelf with him, and and then stop talking about all this silly stuff about him being divine. Yeah. So it was a troubling era. It's one of those things you look back in history and say, how did we get through it?
really, yes.
How
Yeah.
did we get through it? So.
And was Muslim thought on that issue and others um, definitely seeping into even Christian interpretations of things,
Oh,
of
unquestionably, yeah.
beliefs? Yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. Very, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
huge
there was no
challenges.
way for that not to cross over, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the Muslims themselves, right? I mean, they went through an evolution of thought, and for, a number of the early centuries, I mean, they arise out in the desert, and of course they're not, I mean, they're not savages.
right.
Even if you want to call, even if you want to use a loaded term like savages or barbarians, I mean, does that describe people in, the jungle in Colombia in that era,
Hmm.
who are,
Hmm.
1,000 years from any contact with, the larger world? Okay, yeah, probably. But the Arabs who, followed Muhammad, that description doesn't apply to them. They had been part of the commerce of the world, both in terms of goods and of ideas for many centuries.
Yes, yeah,
So, so they were not maybe the most sophisticated people. They weren't necessarily, Athenians of, I mean, of course, then you can read Plato's dialogues and debate whether Athenians of Socrates' era were really that sophisticated either. But yeah, I mean, they perhaps weren't at the highest intellectual pitch that anybody in the uh, in the world had been to at that point. But they were capable people. They weren't that easy to fool.
right.
But they were, I mean, nothing sells like success, and Muhammad had
Yeah,
a lot of it.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so once he wound it up and let it go, it had a lot of momentum to it, an
Hmm.
awful lot of
Hmm.
momentum to it, and it swept across Persia, swept across the Eastern Empire, up to Anatolia, and eventually, of course, it took that too. Well, I mean that was the Turks. Then we started monkeying around with people coming out of Central Asia and all of that craziness. But it swept right across North Africa and started creeping off and all sort of swept across India eventually. I mean,
Mm.
that was a huge conquest. That was
That is,
crazy. I mean,
yeah,
they never converted all of India by any stretch, but they became sort of a super class, a conquering class of people, and ruled a lot of India for a long time. And of course, they got all the way as far as Indonesia. Indonesia is a huge country and is a Muslim country, and
right.
it's a long way from Mecca.
It sure is. Yeah, yeah.
So So yeah, so that there was that era. So yeah, I mean, people took it seriously, and they
Mm.
were, and they were intellectually, the early caliphs for, certainly had people at their courts who, read, translated, commented upon, digested, were in deep, deep conversation with Greek thought.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah,
and however much Christian thought they ingested along the way, debated with, I'm not a master of that subject, but yeah, in the 700s, 800s, 900s, 11th century, 12th century even, they're very intellectually active. And there are,
mm.
there are people in the street who will, take your head off for, saying something from Aristotle, but there are also plenty of people at, in various Muslim metropolises across the Middle East that would be debating it very seriously, writing
Right.
very learned and very thoughtful stuff about it. So,
Interesting. Yeah,
so yeah, so I mean,
the
yeah, they had a
duality of
lot of
it.
intellectual heft, and
Yeah,
then they remarkably seem to have turned away from it, but that's another story. Right. So, and then at this point, that's very much in the future, right? So,
Right.
so Gregory the Seventh is dealing with all of these things. It's a fraught era. The whole Dark Ages is a very fraught era.
Mm.
Um, there's a what's called the Quinisext Council, uh, which an emperors, probably multiple emperors are trying to sell as an ecumenical council. Eventually, is rejected by both East and West, as not legitimate, but it was accepted as legitimate in the East for a while.
Huh.
So yeah, there's just all kinds of stuff that of course we debate the legitimacy of the Second Vatican Council, but the temperature is not quite the same, and the likelihood of someone's head
Okay.
winding up on a pike is not quite the same
Correct. Yeah.
when we're debating
Fortunate.
when we're debating these things. So,
Yeah.
um, fortunately, we haven't quite gotten. I mean, I don't know. I could get to that point eventually. And then actually immediately after him, is Gregory the Third. So, the same era, definitely of Eastern extraction, actually apparently Assyrian in origin. Um, so he's very much, taken up with the iconoclastic heresy. Uh, and of course, as is always the case, like when the Protestants, of course, Protestants took up the iconoclastic banner.
Yes.
um, it's something that continues to appeal to people because it's very simple-minded. Because
Mm.
it's very appealing because it's very simple. But that the of course the counterpoint to that is to go to Spain and go to Santiago and see the cathedral with the you know the censer that hangs from the ceiling permanently
Yes.
and is the size of like 5 men or something.
Yes. That was
Yeah,
not iconoclasm. No.
yeah, they're going to by God take their stand on this is legitimate.
Yeah.
So there was some of that in Gregory the Third's Rome. Apparently, he uh, some of the people who are very in favor of images, of course, then become very dramatically in favor of images.
Interesting. Interesting.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and of course that gets him in an argument with the emperor. The emperor has an army, and the pope still really doesn't. And so he actually goes and grabs some of the papal estates that Gregory the Great had been administering, and more besides, I'm sure.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a terrible situation. And the 8th century, there's the Saracens to worry about. They could land in Rome at any time. They could land in Sardinia and take whatever they want, and are probably going to do it soon, permanently. There's the emperors in Constantinople who are awful, and instead of spending time trying to unify uh, Christendom, as you could already call it, and you know, face the Muslims. Instead, they're engaging in all this iconoclasm crap,
Mm.
and fighting with each other. And of course, I mean, they're Byzantine, right? The word is a legendary word for, intrigue and backstabbing and all of that sort of thing.
Mm.
So, yeah, he's got that to worry about. And then, of course, he always has the Lombards, so he's got that, who are longer lived and more troublesome than the Goths. Constantine puts them in their place for the most part, but it's really a long time before the sort of Lombard threat kind of gives way to, medieval Italy and the different city-states, which of course
Mm.
then Genoa and Florence and Venice and all those become the Pope's headache for centuries to come. So I mean, it changed forms. It changed forms radically, of course, in the Dark Ages. And then it took, a somewhat more stable configuration in the early second millennium. But yeah. So okay, Gregory the Third, Gregory the Fourth, 827 to 840. So we don't really have, one of these really, really short papacies yet until the second millennium. So again, Gregory, and again, as far as we know, born Gregory. Um, I mean, this era. It's some of the least well documented part of the history of the papacy. 827 to 844, involved in quarrels. Yeah, okay. So at this point, whereas the name Leo sticks us squarely in the history of Charlemagne. The history of the name Gregory kind of skips over it, right? So
Okay.
we skip from 741 to 827, and a lot happened in that era. The Battle of Tours, where Charles Martel turns the Muslims back, chases them back into Spain. Uh, we have Charlemagne. Charlemagne, conquers this massive empire, most of what's now France and Germany and the Low Countries, and is crowned, emperor because Leo III looks around and says, we cannot depend on those Byzantine emperors anymore. We need one over here. And this looks like the guy. Again, success sells, right? So, and of course, worked with the Pope and, opposed the Lombards and gotten them in line because they, didn't really align with his goals either. So there was a lot for them to work together on. So that, and then we skip to, and there's finally another Gregory. So Gregory inherits the Carl, the Charlemagne settlement, which unfortunately he's still a Frank, and Franks still divide up their patrimony among their sons, and so chaos, ensues. And
Hmm.
so already in the ninth century, the different, sons of the different descendants of Charlemagne are, arguing with each other, bickering with each other, and of course, yanking the Pope around to take part in their schemes.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that's a lot of what Gregory the Fourth ends up dealing with. So so that's not, from the perspective of, church history, not necessarily super interesting, but that was what was happening. And that's, of course, ultimately why we have a France and a Germany, and for that matter, to a large extent, we have Low Countries, is because of that, because Charlemagne lived in that system. And, for all his personal success, he didn't even either have the vision or the political power to establish, okay, primogeniture or something, because this must stay unified. And otherwise, we'll just go back to the same sort of chaos that we were just getting out of. Um,
Hmm.
that was not to be.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Muslims could never quite capitalize on it.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah. So
Hmm.
that's, somber, not necessarily, again, super interesting from ecclesiastical history. Okay, Gregory the Ninth. So that we jump ahead to the last few years of the 10th century. Awful period. Awful
Another
period.
awful.
So, but okay, and so this is just before the second millennium, 996 to 999. And we have another Bruno. Apparently, there are a number of people. And maybe this is another part of the reason why the custom of taking a regnal name. Of course, the earliest pope to take a regnal name, from what I've read, is John II, because his given name was Mercurius. All right, I'm a Christian. I'm not only a Christian, I'm the Pope. How about y'all just call me John? Y'all just call me John. Yeah, sounds good. And then that became sort of a default. There was you know, an Augustus or somebody, an Octavian, I think, earlier in the 10th century who had taken, I mean, by that point they were already up to John the 12th. That name was just on a tear. For that reason, apparently. I mean, it became the default, apparently.
That's
But
interesting.
but
Yeah.
this guy appears to be one of the early ones who took a name that wasn't John. Like,
It's
okay,
about time.
we had a lot of Johns. In fact, we had that John the 12th who was bad news. So, and there were probably other Johns in between, nevertheless. But he decided to go his own way and apparently took the name Gregory. Okay,
Okay.
so, and he's apparently a learned guy, so good person to hark back to.
Right.
Um, and it's this first German pope. Well, there you go. Yeah, with a name like Bruno. But yeah, so this was, yeah, yeah. The things have changed again. So this idea of the emperor confirming elections is going to go on for a while. And in fact, at this point, and and with Leo, the Leo that's elected in the 11th century, there's only one. I talked about him last time. Also named Bruno.
Huh.
The Romans actually just send a deputation to the, all right, let's just skip all this. Who would you like? And maybe we might name some preferences, but you're going to have to agree to this anyway. So who do you think would be a good pope? And it actually sort of worked for a few decades at least. So apparently you got this guy, good fellow, not a saint, um, but made some bad political decisions, which is easier said. I mean, very easy to do in that era.
Hmm.
Um, and then he's exiled, and he's exiled by a nobleman that he actually goes to bat with the emperor to say, this guy's a rabble rouser, but we should be merciful in asking you to spare this guy and not send your troops to like forcibly kick him out, let alone execute him. So of course, immediately what happens is the guy, leads a revolt, kicks Gregory out of Rome, and names an anti-pope.
Ah,
Of course, what else would you do? Easy thing to do. So anti-pope John the 16th. There you go. There you go. It was a thing to do. I mean, it was this was definitely an era of anti-popes. Um, so Gregory, of course, has to take steps and anathematizes the guy and his anti-pope. Um, and then of course, of course, he's also threatening King Robert of France with like excommunication. Uh, if he did not good heavens, if he did not put away Bertha, who's apparently got her own entry. Ooh, so tempting to click on that. Um, who he had married, although she was related to him not only by spiritual relationship but by blood. What on earth are you? What is this? What? What?
not, hmm.
Who is this? Bertha, Queen of Kent. Oh, this is the wrong. Okay, I think they used some extremely early automated script on the when they first put this up on the internet in the early 90s.
Oh,
Oh no, wait, here we are. Okay, Bertha. Of the various holy women bearing the name of Bertha, five are more particularly worthy of notice. Okay, Bertha, Queen of Kent, is not our woman. She was a contemporary of Gregory I. Cool. Saint Bertha, Virgin and Martyr, died about 690. Okay, not her. Saint Bertha, Abbess of Blangy in Artois. Blangy is not going to be the way the French pronounce it. Blangy, Blangy.
ah, uh-huh.
Blangy. I mean, Blangy. She was the
Blangy,
Abbess of
yeah.
Blangy. I mean, gosh. All right. Died about 725. Definitely not her. And then Blessed Bertha de Bardi. Okay, so they did mess up. Bertha de Bardi, Abbess, died 1163, and Blessed Bertha de Marbais died 1247 in Flanders or so, somewhere around there. All right, so no word on who this Bertha related to King Robert spiritually. What are you talking about? Okay,
Hmm.
I do love the Catholic Encyclopedia. They'll just drop these things like, what are you
Exactly.
even saying? But it's the Dark Ages, right? That's the excitement. We don't know the answers. Nobody wrote it down.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's something that was written down that's the basis for this, but. Yeah. So, oh my, the castle of St. Angelo was next besieged, and when it was taken, Crescentius, the nobleman in question, was hanged upon its walls. Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
That was almost 400 years. It was just over 400 years since Gregory the Great had a procession that where Saint Michael was seen there to
Right.
end the plague. Yeah. Ooh, dang. Oh, Bill. Oh, Bill.
Yep.
It's sobering and it does give. I mean, that's maybe this is my single biggest motivation for doing this is just to I get down about the history of the church and people arguing and you know traditionalists versus liberals and all that sort of thing and whatever the heck Germany is even doing and persecutions all over the place. We'll talk more about that next time. But the church has been through an awful lot of awful stuff, and the papacy
Yes.
in particular has been through an awful lot of
Yeah.
awful
Yeah.
stuff.
Well,
So,
the
yeah,
church is proof that God acts through history, and that allows mankind to grow through history and learn from it and
yeah,
interact with it, and choosing whether to interact in godly or ungodly ways. But
yeah,
it's a very real flesh and blood church, and has one reason to appreciate it is that it has carried through. It has carried the banner
Yeah.
through all of this.
Yeah. I mean,
It
nothing
is
sells like
absolutely
success,
amazing.
but what kind of success?
Right.
What?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
God can always redeem failure into success in one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
But
none of us will live long enough to see the final score.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
We can assume that it'll be a rout. Yes, it'll be
Yeah.
but now I don't
In,
want to
in the
move.
final minutes, God is going to run up the score. That's right.
Hey, that's why we have
Five or
the
15 touchdowns in the last 5 minutes. But yeah, yeah.
I
They
can see the yep,
may look
you're
pretty bad at 6 minutes until the buzzer.
now this
Yeah.
is the commentator who developed the papal bracket to begin with. So you're
Right. Yeah,
yes,
another sports
yes.
metaphor. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go look at Gregory the Sixth is another. Actually, I think he may be the shortest reign so far. So he's a very typical first 1500 years of the church type of pope in that you know. Oh no, he's actually into his third calendar year. Technically, he was
Hmm.
apparently elected just before Christmas in 1046, and dies. Oh no, he's elected in May of 1045. Abdicates, abdicates
Yeah.
in 1046. You could still do
Wow.
that.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So, gosh, okay. In 1045, the youthful libertine Benedict the Ninth occupied the chair of Peter. Anxious, in order, so it is said, this is still of fairly dark ages, that he might marry, to vacate a position into which, although wholly unfit, he had been thrust by his family. He consulted his godfather, John Gratian, who is, I think, a saint, the archpriest of St. John at the Latin Gate, uh, as to whether he could resign. When he was convinced he could, he was offered to give up the papacy into the hands of his godfather for a large sum of money.
Hmm.
Desirous of ridding the see of Rome of, oh gosh, that's there you go. Here you go. Here you go. This is he was tempted in all good faith, simplicity, paid him the money and was recognized as pope in his stead. That's not good. That's called simony. That's bad.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
bad. Even for good reason, that's simony. That's bad.
Oh
That's
my.
bad.
Yeah.
Who took the name Gregory the Sixth? Okay, this is our guy. This is our man.
Okay. He
Yeah,
took
so
the name
his name
Gregory
was
the
John
Sixth.
Gratian, and now he is Pope Gregory the Sixth. It was hailed with joy, even but by such a strict upholder of the right as St. Peter Damian, but it did not bring peace to the church. Simony kind of never does.
Right.
Um, when Benedict left the city after selling the papacy, there was already another aspirant in the field.
Oh
Eh,
my
like you
God.
do. Yeah. John, Bishop of Sabina, had been saluted as Pope Sylvester III by that faction of the nobility which had driven Benedict IX from Rome in 1044. Yeah. I mean, yeah, faction, nobles on one side, nobles on the other. This is going to evolve into what, Dante will talk about, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, right, of his era.
Uh-huh.
People favoring the Pope, people favoring the Emperor, people, again, people in Genoa's court, people in Florence's court, people in Pisa's court, whatever. Um, you know, all of them, jockeying for position and, when they have the chance, using the papacy as a football.
Right.
So, yeah. So we've got two anti-popes because, of course, Benedict the Ninth is going to come back.
He comes back.
Uh, Benedict, unable to, it seems, to obtain the bride on which he had set his heart, soon repented of his resignation, again claimed the papacy, and in his turn, is thought to have succeeded in acquiring dominion over a part of the city. Awesome. That's always great. A civil war within the city itself. Yes, here we go.
Hmm.
Oh my. But here we go. With an empty exchequer and a clergy that had largely lost the savor of righteousness. Again, simony, simony. Um, Gregory was confronted by an almost hopeless task. Nevertheless, with the aid of his capellanus or chaplain, Hildebrand.
Huh.
Hildebrand. So this guy has already got Hildebrand on his side. That was always a good move in the mid 11th century. Get Hildebrand.
Huh.
Find that man, track him down, get him over here. I need his help. So yeah, which he was, he couldn't, he was not a miracle worker. He was just a very, very competent fellow. Um, but yeah, I mean, he couldn't immediately put the situation to rest. Um, and of course, eventually this Gregory, because it's this Gregory, um, is going to resign. So at least there's that. So Sylvester alone presented himself the Senate. Well, I mean, there was only two, right? Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, so we've got Gregory the Sixth. We have Clement the, Benedict the Ninth. If you think popes can resign, I mean, at this point, we're sort of committed to thinking popes can resign, aren't we?
Right.
It seems reasonable for a serious enough reason. Um, which includes like I never should have been pope at all. I
Yeah,
think that's a serious
that's an
enough reason.
interesting one. Yeah.
Obviously, I never should have been pope at all. Um, and then uh, and then this bishop who's just the creature of some faction, right?
Mm,
So it's
mm.
a mess.
Yeah.
It's just a mess. So Gregory decides that he's going to do at least a decent thing and resign. So. Yeah, and then Sylvester was confined to a monastery. Benedict had no claim to the papacy as he voluntarily resigned it. But as actually this happens multiple times in history. Gregory, John Gratian, nice guy, let himself, get talked into simony as making sense in order to get rid of somebody who really shouldn't be pope. In
Mm,
order to sort of clear the decks and start over again with a clean slate, he also resigns.
mm.
So that's going to play out multiple times in history. So let's take a quick break and then we'll come back with Hildebrand because of course Hildebrand is Gregory the Seventh is, the second greatest pope to be named Gregory.
Ah,
So
okay.
that's let's stop and reconnoiter a little bit.
Okay. Yes, indeed. Oh, there
Okay.
we are.
There we
Hmm.
are. So all right, so that brings us to, the other great Pope Gregory, which is born Hildebrand,
Hmm.
or in German apparently Hellebrand. There you go.
Okay.
Which, of course, signifying to those of his contemporaries that loved him a bright flame, to those that hated him a brand of hell, because there were a lot of people who hated him because he wanted them to stop being, priest with a concubine on the side, or taking, or paying money for ecclesiastical offices.
Huh.
So, so again,
Particularly.
there's both. Is it Leo the Sixth? No, it was later than that. It's like Leo the Eighth or something. Leo the Ninth. It's Leo the Ninth, I think. Yeah, Leo the Ninth was the Pope in the. So at this point, right? Of course, if you're keeping, speaking of a sports metaphor, if you're keeping score, right? At this point, Leo is ahead 9 popes to 7
Oh my.
for what
Okay.
that's worth, right? So, but Gregory is gonna is gonna go on a bit of a run here in the second millennium and pull ahead of Leo. So and Gregory the Seventh, continues that. So
Okay.
Gregory the Seventh is the great. So he's the great reformer, right?
Hmm.
Now, in as a secondary consequence. I mean, and of course, it's not like, Gregory the First wasn't already doing things like this. It's not like Leo wasn't already doing things like this. Leo the First, I should say.
Uh-huh.
Um, but Gregory the Seventh does a great deal. He's a good administrator, just like Gregory the First.
Ah.
He knows
Hmm.
how to run things. He knows how to manage money, and he does it honestly, which is, never that
Ah,
common a thing.
really?
Corruption is a great universal temptation of the human race.
Yeah.
Um, so so he's going to, take things into his own hands. He is going to, look at the Western, the church in the West, the entire Latin Rite, and look at it and say, we can't have all of this, and that means you're going to report to me, and you're going to report to my curia on this, that, and
Hmm.
the other thing. And when you get out of line, I'm going to address it through these structures that I'm going to put in place, right? And compared to what we have today, I mean, you could look at that. It'd be interesting to talk to an outright historian of the church, and maybe more than one, and to get their take on this. But I think there is a through line from Gregory the Seventh through the Middle Ages, through the Reformation and Counter-Reformation era, and then all the way out to the First Vatican Council
Gee.
and Pius the Ninth
Okay.
of the Pope, the Latin Rite becoming ever more centralized, and the papacy becoming ever more, exercising ever more, shall we say, day-to-day authority.
Oh, okay.
Ever more things being referred to Rome, ever more structure being evolved in the Curia, so that again, and there's always that motivation of, and this is how, I mean, like, today we're like, well, this is why we do things like that, because otherwise, the bishops in Germany will all decide that, you know, 40 years after time or 60 years after the time when this really would have been popular, or we're going to go ahead and just, basically say divorce is fine. And,
Mhm.
and then homosexual couples, can be married and all that. So we're just going to basically do the whole modern program
Uh,
as it existed somewhere between 1985 and 2005.
right.
So like it's a little, first of all, it's a little late for that. And second of all, it's like, well, what are you going to do other than, Rome needs to do something about it.
Hmm.
So, as I'm sure any listener can tell that I have my hesitancy about this centralization of the papacy and, what it's done to the life of the church. Boy, you can see why. You can sure see
Right.
why. And Hildebrand's era was just, I mean, it was a wreck. It was an absolute wreck. In terms of that was, those things that I, mentioned earlier, they were just rampant.
Hmm.
Um, they just, that was how things were run. People bought, offices as priests, as, curate of this parish, as, you know, as abbot, as whatever, and derived an income from it. The ecclesiastical benefice business, which will
Right.
go on for centuries and centuries.
Right.
Even though today it's very strange, like reading Saint Ignatius on, well, people confuse the means of the end, and and so he talks about two cases. One of them is, someone who determines to be married and then decides how to serve God as a married person when he should be deciding how to serve God and whether marriage fits into that.
Right.
And then his other example is somebody who decides, well, I'm going to accept this ecclesiastical benefice and then decide how to serve God in that state, which of course implies he's going to have to be a priest or something. Wow,
Hmm.
that's a bygone way of life.
Yeah.
That is a very
Yeah.
bygone way of life.
Huh.
And of course, it's what, it was the evolution of what was already the case in, Gregory the First's day of, boy, the church owns a lot of land because people
Hmm.
keep leaving land to the church. There are,
Hmm.
people who die childless, and that just seems like the thing to do in so many circumstances. And then dow a chantry and, pay for a priest to celebrate mass for me every day or every week or every month or whatever my budget will afford
Right.
often to the end of time or until my country, becomes Protestant or becomes so atheist that we can't find any priest to do this anymore, or the French Revolution comes along and sweeps it all away. Whatever.
Yeah.
But forever, I mean, several centuries worth of masses is not a bad thing, I suppose.
Right. Right. Although the promise of perpetuity seems impermanent,
Yeah,
as a matter of fact,
that didn't really
de
happen.
facto. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. But anyway, to come back to Hildebrand, right? So he is the factotum for popes for, decades. The 1050s, the 1060s, he's here, there, and everywhere. Carrying messages, calling councils on behalf of the Pope, uh, naming people to this position, throwing people out of this position. And then finally in 1073, it's his turn,
Ah.
right? So he is going to be made Pope. And again, just like Gregory the First, he does not want to be Pope. And of course, no one better
Oh.
knows what how bad a job it is being Pope. Like he's been answering to popes. He's seen 6 or 8 different takes on how to approach all these problems.
Uh,
None of them. I want none of it. No,
right.
no interest.
Well, Gregory is the name for him then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So
Yeah.
he absolutely takes the name of Gregory.
Yeah.
And even with, his somewhat immediate predecessor, Gregory the Sixth, not being great from that perspective, but people knew history in that era, and they certainly knew Gregory the Great was who this guy was harking back to.
Okay.
There could I'm sure have been no doubt about that. So there he is. Um, and of course the evolution of that political situation in Italy, the Saracens in Sicily have sort of, they're on the way down if they haven't already been thrown out by the Normans.
Ah,
But the whole, you know, factions in Rome, that's going to continue for centuries. The rise of the city-states in Italy, and then always, some problem with the emperor. And in fact, one of the great reform reforms of Gregory the Seventh that shaped the church and the papacy into what we know today. Because I mean, up to this point and up to actually Hildebrand's own election, popes were elected by a process that we probably, we would not even recognize. In fact, we don't really even necessarily know that much about it.
right.
And we don't really know how organized or how much of a structure there was about it. Well, Hildebrand is going to fix that.
Uh-huh.
So he is the last pope to have his election confirmed by an emperor.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's an emperor that's going to turn out to like fight cats and dogs with him because of course. But well, I mean, of course, because what's he going to do? He's going to formalize, and it's not like he was making this up out of whole cloth, because it was the
Uh-huh.
clergy of Rome that elects the Pope, and Archdeacon Hildebrand is who they, everybody just again, this is figurative, not literal, but everybody in the room just like that guy. Yes,
Yeah.
it's his turn. It's Hildebrand. Hildebrand is the
Yeah.
only one. He's the only one left. In fact, he's the best. We probably should have elected him Pope 3 or 4 popes ago.
Uh,
Yeah. So
history is repeating itself.
yeah. But he's the guy. Um, yeah. I mean, he did. Gregory the Sixth was one of the early popes to. As I'm skimming the article here, he did look back to Gregory the Sixth. Well, and he also named himself again. This also gets into another tactic that you can take as a pope. And again, in an era of anti-popes, right? So we just talked about Gregory the Sixth and this whole business of was Gregory the Sixth an anti-pope because he was a simoniac. Well, he's probably legitimate, but just to clear the air, he resigned.
Okay.
But when Hildebrand announces or has whoever announce sibi nomen imposuit, Gregorius septem. Oh, just so you all know, that means that Gregory the Sixth was legitimate, right?
Right.
So there was that. So
Hmm.
that's a tactic that you can take, and all the way down to like John the 23rd, who apparently, and of course, John the 23rd is wading into a controversy that's centuries dead because there we got to John the 22nd in the 1300s,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and then he says, "No, I'm the 23rd." Like, really? We thought the next Pope John would be numbered something else, but you're the boss. Okay.
Ah,
So that, in this case, it was very, very clear and present. It was something all within everybody's living memory, or almost everybody's.
right.
So so okay, Hildebrand, he comes in, centralizes, and he establishes the conclave as we know it, basically, or
Ah,
at least the structure that will, by direct, obvious evolution, become the conclave as we know it. Right.
that's an important landmark. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a big thing. Um, okay, that's again, there's a ton more you could say about Gregory the Seventh, an extremely important character, but since we're trying to get a broader perspective of the name Gregory, okay, so that's got us Gregory the Seventh, and the last Pope Gregory was Gregory the 16th, so we got a little more ground yet to cover.
Hmm.
Um, Gregory the Eighth, okay, a century later, 1187. Uh, Elected at Ferrara because there were clearly problems in Rome.
Ah,
October 21st, 1187, died at Pisa because of problems in Rome.
oh
December
my.
17th, 1187, after a pontificate of 1 month and 27 days. I hate that. Right? The 1187 witnessed the almost complete, the author of the Catholic Encyclopedia notes this in passing, witnessed the almost complete obliteration of Christianity in Palestine. Wow, let's make a
Gee.
slight overstatement, but definitely Latin Rite Christianity. Yeah, so Saladin wins a decisive victory near Lake Tiberias, and he takes over Jerusalem. And immediately after that, this guy's elected pope, and immediately after that, he dies.
Oh my.
So, I mean, that happens. It's what you do. He was sort of star-crossed,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah, and he tried to this was the era of Frederick Barbarossa. So he lives long enough to probably write a letter to Frederick Barbarossa trying to let's turn over a new leaf and make friends, and then he dies. Uh
Mm.
because it's the Middle Ages, right? That happens.
Right.
So, okay. And now that he was now, of course, he's named himself Gregory the Eighth. So you all knew that the guy, that Henry the Fifth, who was still Pope, who was still Emperor, after harassing Hildebrand, who died in 1085, he's still harassing people in 1118, and names somebody, Gregory the Eighth. So Gregory the Eighth comes along in 1187, and by, simply saying Gregory Octo or whatever, that guy was not legit. He was not legit. Just so you all know, strike him from the diptychs. He's not legitimate. So, okay, Gregory the Ninth dies in 1241. How long is he Pope? They have a habit of just not giving his regnal years at the beginning of the entry.
Ah,
So you have to skim down. Um, okay, so now we're dealing with yet another emperor. I mean, of course, what is it? The 13th century. Of course, the Pope and the Emperor are arguing. Just ask Dante how that worked.
uh-huh.
So this is absolutely that era. In fact, well, Dante's probably not alive yet, but his grandparents definitely are. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, so there's a big dispute between the Pope. The Pope actually, decides to excommunicate him because it was a tool in their toolbox.
Right.
And he goes and preaches crusade because again, 13th century, it's a thing to do. We just
Right.
heard the previous pope was, in the immediate aftermath of losing Jerusalem. So I don't know which that's the third crusade they're preaching at that point or what, but um, so this guy's elected in 1227, and his name is Ugolino. He was originally Count of Segni. That's interesting. Um, and he was already 80 years old, but full of energy. Huh. Must have
Gee, well.
must have taken care of himself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, and of course he must have been single. Maybe he's a widower. Hard to say. I mean, he's 80, right? So,
Mm.
um, yeah. So, and okay, again, a career diplomat, kind of like Gregory the First, has been a lot of places and knows a lot of people, and knows he's going to deal with, if this still Frederick Barbarossa, probably. Um, so so finally, Frederick, you know, goes on crusade, only not really. He had on 8 or 9 previous occasions postponed his departure for the East. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. So of course, there's the War of Manifestos. That sounds very modern, does it not?
Yeah.
Um, so they both publish these, broadsides against each other. Um, And then he finally does actually. Oh yeah, okay. So he finally takes off, and at this point, the Pope's like, "No, you're still excommunicated. You need to come and I'm not only am I not going to extend you my blessing even by letter, but in fact, I'm going to double down, reiterate the fact that you're excommunicated, and explicitly state that everyone with you is released from their oath of allegiance to you." Right?
Mm. Mm. Wow.
So this is the Pope playing hardball with tools that in the 13th century are very powerful tools, actually.
Yes.
In
Yes.
the 18th century, it's hard to imagine this, getting much traction with anybody. But in the 13th century, people took this very, very seriously.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So,
Hmm.
yeah. So okay, so he's a patron of the mendicant orders, which of course, so the Franciscans are fairly newborn at this point.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, yeah, so he saw an excellent means by means of, the Franciscans and also presumably the Dominicans, as Armand also meant, for
Right.
counteracting by voluntary poverty the love of luxury and splendor which was possessing many ecclesiastics. Not that much has changed in 200 years. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they keep it a little more under wraps than they did in the 11th century when it was really kind of the Wild West.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, the Wild West, Western Christianity. But yeah, so that's what we're talking about. You know, and actually there's more than I thought to Gregory the Ninth. There's maybe we're gonna this is just going to be a pretty broad sweep, right? Uh,
Right.
so Gregory the Tenth is also in the 13th century, so that's a big name in the 13th century. He's pope for 8 years from 1268. No, he's not. The cardinals assembled in Viterbo after the death of Pope Clement IV in November of 1268, and that left the Holy See vacant for almost 3 years. That's a
Gee
thing that could
whiz.
happen back then. That was
Wow.
a thing that could happen in the conclave. I mean, that was, it got to the point where it's like, no, we're literally going to lock you up until you give us an answer because you tend
Right.
to do crap like this.
Right.
Neither of the parties could poll the two-thirds majority vote, nor was either willing to give way to the other for the election of a candidate to the papacy. They could not, of course, time and time and time again in this circumstance, eventually we come to a compromise candidate. And that, let's see, let's skim and see if that describes this guy. Um, okay, they united their ballots in choice of Teobaldo Visconti, of Archdeacon of Liège, who is not a cardinal himself, nor even a priest. I mean, in the first millennium, that wouldn't have stopped anybody for a second. So,
Right. Right.
yeah. But of course, he's Archdeacon of Liège, not of Rome. But that's fine. So, what is this guy? What is this guy's name, actually? Let's say Teobaldo Visconti, Archdeacon of Liège. So he's got an Italian name, but he's Archdeacon of Liège. All right, like I could get out a map and try to make sense of that, but it's okay. All
Yeah.
right, so this guy's Pope, and the most notable thing about this, this was the Great Scholastic era. So he's a contemporary of people like Albert the Great and Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure and all those people. Um, so Gregory the 11th, right? Okay. He Pierre Roger de Beaufort, right? Okay, so this is our chance to take a snapshot of oh yeah, this is the 14th century. This is, the French period, and if even if he's not an Avignon Pope, this is the French influence on the papacy is going to make that thinkable.
Right.
No, he's totally an Avignon Pope. Okay. Um, yeah, so like the preceding popes of Avignon, Gregory the XI made the fatal mistake of appointing Frenchmen who did not understand the Italians and whom the Italians hated. Um,
Oh.
that's interesting. There's a link for hate. Awesome.
Oh.
The algorithm linked hate. So there's
That's
apparently an
funny.
article on the hate. As legates and governors of the ecclesiastical provinces in Italy, because of course the Pope has to run, all the stuff that he owns in Italy, which he continues to do by remote control. But, between Rome being hostile and Avignon being, oh, it's so comfortable over here, especially since, my name is something like Pierre Roger de Beaufort. They go, and again, it's a scandal, and it's, it breeds anti-popes like, mosquitoes, right? A situation like this, somebody just has to pop up in Rome and, stand up for legitimacy. And, the Romans are liable to just throw their hats in behind him. And here you got an anti-pope on your hands.
Right.
Um, and of course, he's the one in Rome. So am I the anti-pope or are you the anti-pope, you little
Yeah.
sniveling
Gee whiz. Yeah.
what's it in Avignon. So yeah, okay. Babylonian captivity of the papacy, great schism of the papacy. All right, Gregory the 12th probably still in this era, 1406 to 1415. The a legal pope during the Western Schism. I can almost hear the depressed tones of the writer of this article of the
Yeah.
encyclopedia. Like this was still
Uh,
going on. We've still got
yeah.
several to go before we really get rid of this.
Gosh.
Well, and okay, and so like we were talking about, so go all the way back to Gregory the Sixth, right?
Hmm.
So the Mexican standoff, type of situation for the papacy. Here we go, right? This guy, Angelo Corrario, okay, or Correr, he became Bishop of Castello in 1380, titular Patriarch of Constantinople in 1390, because yeah, we had we being the Western Church, the Latin Rite Crusaders had conquered Constantinople and probably hadn't quite unwound that yet. Um, yeah, so he's titular Patriarch of Constantinople. Under Pope Innocent VII, he was made Apostolic Secretary, Legate of Ancona, and finally the Cardinal Priest of San Mareo, which means he's now in the group. Um, he's an elector and could be elected Pope. Um, so it was due to his great piety and his earnest desire for the end of the schism that after the death of Innocent VII, the cardinals at Rome unanimously elected him Pope on. Ah, that's surprising. That probably didn't happen very often in the 14th or 15th centuries. But November 30th, 1406, took the name Gregory the XII. Before the papal election, each cardinal swore that in
Hmm.
order to end the schism, he would abdicate the papacy if he should be elected, provided his rival at Avignon, which was Benedict the XIII, would do the same. Aha, right? So at this point, we're in Rome and we're electing an Italian. All right. So Gregory the XII repeated his oath after his election and to all appearances had the intention to keep it. Apparently, he notified Benedict the XIII of his election and the stipulation under which it took place, and reiterating his willingness to lay down the tiara if Benedict would do the same. Again, so this is like we need to clear the waters, and the best way to do this is for us both to resign and just like and then merge our colleges of cardinals and have an election that everyone can agree on. Please God, can we do that? So this was toward the end of the schism, but yes.
Hmm.
So yeah, but of course Benedict the XIII, wishy-washy, goes back and forth. Um, yeah, was afraid, refused to actually meet with Benedict, um, because he was afraid that he would use it just as an excuse to capture him. Like that's never happened in history, and certainly not in this history. Yeah. So, it's not great. But it was people doing the best that they could. Oh, and then of course, okay, what's the actual resolution here is we actually call the Council of Constance. Of course, then we get the conciliar era, which we forget about. That's far been long memory hold by Catholics because we're still in the Middle Ages and people don't read about the Middle Ages. But yeah, so that happened, and then we had that drama to deal with for a while.
Right.
Okay, then we jump another century and a half to Gregory the XIII. So he's in he's 1572 to 1585. Okay, we know what's happening then. Now we finally, reached, where Whig history even starts, right? In the year, 1517 or whatever it is when Luther nails his theses to the wall.
Oh,
Um,
right.
yeah. So now we've actually come under that microscope. And we kind of come out of the shadows in which that whole millennium from 500 to 1500 lives, back into things where, people who read any history, have more of an idea as to what the heck is going on, right? So,
Oh, absolutely.
so this guy has been sent. He was in 1559. He was sent by Pius the Fourth, Pius we didn't talk about, to the Council of Trent, where he remained until his conclusion in 1563. So Pius the Fourth makes him cardinal priest, puts him in the group, puts him in the list, sends him as a legate to Spain. A cardinal? No, no, no. An archbishop has been has been imprisoned by the Inquisition. That's a touchy situation. Yeah.
Geez,
Okay, so this guy is obviously around. He's being entrusted with important, sensitive missions, and Pius V passes away in 1572. This guy's elected pope. Ugo, buon
Hmm.
compagni. That's terrible Italian. Sorry, folks, but yeah, I just love Ugo. Uh, his youth was not stainless. He had an illegitimate son. Uh, Even after entering the clerical state, he was worldly minded and fond of display. But from the time he became pope, I mean, this is it. As an American, I call it a Chester Arthur situation. But it's not uncommon that people will actually, you know, it's not that uncommon. It's uncommon, but it's not that uncommon. It does happen sometimes. It's a recognized phenomenon. But people, are entrusted with a high office. So Chester Arthur, of course, is, he's in the dark ages of American history, right? Between the Civil War and, say, Teddy Roosevelt. Who knows anything about those presidents, right?
Right.
You know, other than maybe a little bit about Ulysses S. Grant, and just because he was a general. Um, but so, Arthur is elected because Garfield is assassinated, right? Or he's not elected. He's the vice president. He becomes president when Arthur's assassinated. And Chester Arthur is like, just a Republican machine politician of the era. Convenient guy to stick on the ticket because, he brings some, money and influence with him. And then he kind of does a bit of a volte-face and becomes actually kind of a stand-up mensch for the, couple of years that he's president. Um, so, this guy likewise, this, Gregory the 13th, and again, Gregory has been running up the score for a while now, so this is already, a few names ahead of Leo. And and so he becomes a fairly substantial fellow, and he's basically, of course, he's rolling out, more uh counter-reformation measures. Sends some, he starts a congregation of cardinals for Germany again. What do you do? He starts a committee. I mean, again, this is the legacy of
Interesting.
Gregory the Seventh, right?
Yeah.
We're in Rome. We've got a curia. We've got a large organization. We've got cardinals, committees of cardinals doing this and that. So he's not to descend into too many of the details, but and it's still the era. It's still the 16th century. So, there's still thought it's like, the war of movement in the West, the beginning of the First World War. There's still the thought that we might be able to, move, shift things around. And it's not, this is 1914 in the First World War, not 1917. Where, basically, I hate to call it the Protestant Iron Curtain, but, that has descended. And we know who's Protestant, we know who's Catholic, and that's just not going to change. Um, that's not going to change again. Uh, and it's, really sad. But, again, and we've lived, really, realistically, we've lived to see the end of even that, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
that doesn't describe Europe at all anymore.
Oh,
All
that's right.
these Protestant establishment countries, does it even matter anymore?
Right.
Um, okay, that was Gregory the 13th. Gregory the 14th, Pope for a year in the 1590s, and probably just took that name because Gregory the 13th was somebody that people liked. I mean, Gregory the First, of course. Yes. Awesome. Okay, yeah, but he's got another great papal election story, Bill. You'll love this. All right.
Yeah.
Cardinal Montalto came to his cell to inform him that the Sacred College had agreed on his election. It's an interesting process. Well, I mean, you pass votes, you like, I don't know if they're on a straka and you throw them in a pot like, Athens or what. But, Cardinal Montalto comes to his cell, found him kneeling in prayer before a crucifix.
Oh
Went
my.
on When on the next day he was elected, apparently so the process had to, come to completion, he burst into tears, said to the cardinals, God forgive you, what have you done?
See that? Oh, there's a real consistency of
Yes.
fruit here.
Elected. When was he elected? He was it was 5 December 1590. Protracted conclave of more than 2 months. He dies 15 October 1591. Yes. So not a lot of time to do a whole lot. I mean, that era, that was the era when the Protestants were, in danger of taking over France. And of course, Henry of Navarre does take over France, but he becomes nominally Catholic, and eventually things are salvaged to the degree that they're salvaged in France. Uh,
Right.
yeah. So, all right, Gregory the 15th, 1621 to 1623. Again, pretty short reign. And that's the early years of the 30 Years' War. So that's a very sad period.
Hmm.
Um, let's see, so Gregory the 15th, yeah. Papal election. Okay, so he actually reforms papal elections. Huh. Only three modes of papal election are to be allowed: scrutiny, compromise, and quasi-inspiration. In his bull Aeterni Patris, that would be intriguing reading. What do
Hmm.
you mean by quasi-inspiration? It sounds like, right, when everybody comes into the room and like, it's Hildebrand. No, it's Hildebrand. Yeah, we all know it's Hildebrand. It's his
Right.
turn. It's his turn. He's the only man for it. Um, yeah. So, but yeah. So the people, it's again, that institution has existed since Gregory the Seventh. But it's evolved a lot over the years, and of course, John Paul II, reformed it further. Did Benedict change some things too? Probably Francis did. I don't even remember. Everybody's got some, it's a, we're living through a time of change in the church. So, we're still trying to figure out what the papacy, I mean, we're still trying to figure out what the papacy is like in the aftermath of losing the papal states, to be
Right.
honest,
That's right.
at the time scales at which the papacy does things. Let alone what is the papacy like after the Second Vatican Council.
Right.
So that's, again, I was talking to somebody just last night who's also very intrigued to see where Leo takes this, rereading of the documents of the council. Because,
Yes.
yeah, a lot of people are waiting with bated breath on that, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
So,
And to what degree will history come around and new points be added, but also old points be reiterated? Uh,
yeah.
that's the church history, and it's the way that God writes God writes straight with crooked lines. Huh?
Yes, very
And
much
that's
so.
I think that's the whole story of Gregory's, and also the idea of restructuring the papacy. Lots of structural
Yeah.
change, some pretty good administration amidst very hard times.
Yeah. Yeah. Then we're going to have to cut Gregory the 16th very short. He's in an interesting era in that he's 1831 to 1846. So that's, when the loss of the papal states could now be seen, coming up on the horizon. It's after the French Revolution, it's after Napoleon, it's after Pius the Sixth and Seventh have been frog marched around by Napoleon, and then the papal states are, reconstituted, the Congress of Vienna, but the clock is ticking. And so Gregory the 16th actually has to preside over, the great powers kind of intervene and try to, meddle with how the papal states are run. Nobody's really settled with nobody's satisfied with the outcome. So the question continues. And of course,
Yeah,
Leo the 13th is already a priest in this era, and is, thinking about it and is already, politically active, and he's responding to this very period.
oh,
So, but that is the most recent Pope Gregory. So he's not a figure that anyone at this point like has on their mind at all as a figure to hark back to. So there's the argument that I have put Gregory too high on the bracket, but Gregory the Great, Hildebrand, it's just such a papal name, right?
yeah,
It is just
yeah.
such a classical name. And people beyond them. Again, we've done a number of popes very short shrift here, but yeah. So I would not be surprised at all if in my remaining lifetime a pope took that name,
Indeed, right.
depending on how long I live. Which there's no guarantee I'll outlive Leo. So
Uh, well, no guarantees, and I think
there's
the
never a
popes
guarantee.
would have told you that too from their own experience.
That's right.
No guarantees. But it's neat that the Gregory name is a kind of through line through a lot of remarkable history and change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
that's these first two names. When you've got, when in January of 2025 you had 13 Leos and 16 Gregories already, you know, that is a lot of history. There's,
yeah, really
you know, that that
amazing.
that's from the first one to the last one, the church has changed enormously, and yet it's still the Church of Jesus Christ preaching,
That's right.
the gospel of, you know, the great commission of, love God as, with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your
Right.
neighbor as yourself.
That's right.
Um,
Lots of constants there in the amid all the change. Yeah.
yeah. Yep. All right. Well, we'll call it there. I'm really glad to get back in touch with you, Bill, and
Yeah, likewise.
we'll hopefully talk again a little sooner.
Very good. I enjoy the history lessons, and it's packaged in a new, interesting way with the names and the church themes. Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, hopefully our listeners are enjoying it too.
very good. Yes, and back to it soon, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. All right, my friend.
We hope you enjoyed this new episode of That's So Second Millennium. Feel free to subscribe, share, or leave us a comment at that'sso2ndmillennium.net. Thanks for listening.